Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Something that didn't come up last night, a lot of things didn't, but did yesterday, pre-debate. Trump posting on Truth Social. If Republicans in the House and Senate don't get absolute assurances on election security, they should, this is all caps, of course, they should in no way, shape, or form go forward with a continuing resolution on the budget. The Democrats are trying to stuff voter registrations with illegal aliens. Don't let it happen. Close it down. The SAFE Act, originally introduced by Texas Republican Chip Roy, passed the House on its own in July. Every Republican voted for it, along with 5 Democrats. But there are some House Republicans, as well as Senate Republicans, who don't want the SAFE Act tethered to a continuing resolution to fund the government. You know, God forbid there be a temporary furlough of 20% of the federal workforce that no one would notice. That's the end of the world. And, of course, it will be reported like that by the D.C. press corps. So it just in terms of this being a moment that I'm sure will pass, but Trump at least going on the record to put some attention on it. I mean, the SAFE Act just requires people to have an ID in order to register to vote. This revolutionary concept. And why is this relevant? Well, for example, 140,000 cheeseheads can vote in the 24 election without proving their identity by self-identifying as indefinitely confined. We actually talked about this post-2020, this indefinitely confined designation that is a unique provision of Wisconsin election law. It's skyrocketed since 2016 when approximately 66,000 voters registered on the status. In 2020, it went up to 266,000. And this is saying, you know, I'm physically incapacitated in some way such that I can't get out to vote. And so I need an absentee ballot, and that's the way I'll do it. Wisconsin voter ID laws require citizens to show ID to vote in most circumstances, but it's not required simply to register. And the indefinitely confined provision provides this loophole for the elderly, sick, or physically unable to get to the polls with the opportunity to vote. And gee golly, what a surprise. Perhaps some political operatives are taking advantage of that in terms of ballot harvesting. So, I mean, just going back to why this is relevant, there is some concern about said election integrity in places like Wisconsin that was decided by many fewer votes than those under the indefinitely confined exception. For more on this and other fallout from the debate last night, please be joined by David Harsanyi, senior editor at the Federalist, Federalist.com. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
So the SAFE Act and election integrity, I assume we should maintain our cynicism about anything substantial happening at this juncture with Chuck Schumer as the Senate president and weak-kneed House Republicans that are not going to go along with a quote-unquote government shutdown because they have their own electoral interests to be concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, I am all for government shutdowns whenever we can have them, but the truth is that most of these people are terrified of the political fallout from these shutdowns. The Republicans, going back to the 90s, have never been able to really make sound arguments, even though I do think often they have them. So I don't, it's a lot of kabuki theater, I think, going on, and it's unlikely that they'll have even, I believe, the votes in the House to do it in the end.
And then the question becomes, and this is, I guess, a question for the Trump campaign, for the RNC. So absent some legislation that sends a unmistakable signal to election operatives applying their dark arts in places like Wisconsin, what is the Trump campaign and the party doing to address things like 140,000 indefinitely confined to make sure that everything is meets everything is on the up and up, complies with the law?
I mean, they should be deploying armies of lawyers, right, to these states. But the fact is that whoever loses, and if Trump loses, this just gives people, I don't know, plants cynicism and skepticism about an election. And that's terrible for democracy. And if Democrats were really concerned about democracy, if it was as sacred as they say they believe it is, they would have no problem with making sure that only citizens were voting. I don't know how big that problem is or isn't, but if it isn't happening, then I'm not exactly sure why it's such a big deal to ensure that there are laws upholding that. So, I mean, I do know, because they know that it might happen and they don't care, and they like to create this kind of this kind of loose election. That's their goal in many states.
Well, right, and in fact, there are cases. I mean, you have the Heritage Foundation database on it. You had a case that was publicized this week of, I believe, a woman from Guatemala who illegally voted in both the 2016 and 2020 election in Alabama. You say, well, Alabama, that doesn't matter, so on and so forth. That's not the point. The point is to say that if it's happening somewhere, you think that's the only case in America, right? Especially with the influx of 10 million plus people in this country illegally over the last 3.5 years. Of course, what's happening in one place, where just like we talk about secretaries of state cleaning the voter rolls in places like Virginia and Texas and Ohio, they've got problems in those 3 states, but the other 47 states are fine? Obviously not.
Yeah, it definitely happens. And it definitely happens more than this paranoia that Democrats spread all the time, that people are being denied the ability to vote. Not a single American who's able to vote is being denied that right. We should all be just asking for simple things like an ID to vote, which is, of course, the standard worldwide in the West, in free nations, even in nations that aren't that free, frankly. So, yeah, it's mind-boggling.
I do have to ask you, since you wrote a book about it, I was shocked to learn that Kamala owns a piece. I wanted to hear.
Carries. Huh?
If Trump was actually paying attention to what she was saying, he might have queried her to give us more details on this gun you own and whether you and Coach Walls go to the range, or tell us about.
She goes shooting with Dougie.
Well, yeah, tell us about your record as a sportswoman.
Yeah, I would have asked her. I would love to know what gun you pretend to own. But I don't know. I mean, I looked into that, and there was an article a while back where one of her staffers claimed that she had a gun. If I was a journalist whose beat was the presidential election, I might try to look into it and see if she actually has one. I'm still skeptical that she does, but in any event, by the way, even if she had a gun, even if she had an arsenal, it doesn't mean that she doesn't want to destroy the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
I mean, she was out there saying that she wanted to, through an executive order, confiscate basically semi-auto rifles. I mean, that is a person who does not believe in the Second Amendment.
Yeah, no question.
Mandatory gun buyback.
Maybe that staffer had that gun pointed at him or her, given her relationship with staff. Maybe that's how they found out she has a piece. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe she used it for protection when she was working at McDonald's.
Oh, that's on the
allegedly, walk home or
yes.
something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
She grew up in a middle-class household.
Middle class, yeah.
And they were fact-checked,
That's the story.
Trump lied 33 times. This is CNN. And that she misled the public just one time. Did you buy that?
That's insane. I saw that. That is insane. I mean, there was one question she answered where she lied like 3 times about things that Trump did. She repeated the myth about him saying, good people on both sides. She did the bloodbath comment. I mean, that was in one answer. And, I mean, granted, I think she avoided answering questions in general, but she lied plenty and misled plenty. You can't have people fact-checking one candidate and letting the other just say what they want. I mean,
right, but
it's
Trump
just
seemed flat-footed on that, especially the bloodbath. He should have said, boom, I was talking about what's going to happen to the auto industry if it's mandated EVs. But he didn't. He kind of tiptoed around it. I didn't think he was ready. Did you?
No, I didn't. And there were other instances where he should have been dunking on her where he didn't. He just didn't. It seemed like she baited him with that rally thing she said, and then he was just all over the place. I mean, he needs to be much more focused. I'm not saying he did a good job, but he did have to debate 3 people, which isn't exactly a fair fight typically. Yeah,
although, the 3 of them combined, have a room temperature IQ. So, I mean, I'm not giving him much consideration on that score because the things were so obvious. I mean, they came at him exactly as they telegraphed they would come at him in ways that are so easy to dismiss and deflect and stay on point and focus people on what's important here and indicate that you recognize what's important in so doing.
Yeah, I don't think he's a good debater. I never have. I think he has moments where he says something that people remember and that helps him win, but he's just all over the place. And there were many times he could have shot back with some, good fact or debunked what they were saying. And he just, he was off in some other direction. And so, I mean, he should do much better. But, we can't keep having these debates where every question is framed from a left-wing perspective, and the focus is always from a left-wing prism. I mean, they didn't even ask her, you were in this administration for 4 years. Did you know that Joe Biden is incoherent and isn't doing his job? Or, but they asked Trump about his comment about her not being black. I mean, it's so skewed. It's useless.
Yeah,
and then January 6th.
Well, I mean, you have to be better. I mean, you have to be better than they are because you're playing on their turf. There's no question. But the problem is they have control of the biggest blowtorches, and they are in a position where they don't have to participate. I know Musk tweeted out like, I will propose a debate, and if Kamala doesn't agree, then we'll just have a forum with Trump on X. Well, that's all well and good, but I mean, you're not going to get the people that you need to tune in. And this is what happens when you have the left operating from a position of command control over all of the cultural institutions, including the fourth estate, which is basically what they have. Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I think a good debate would be the candidates maybe asking each other questions or having proxies asking questions of the other. But I mean, they didn't mention, education at all, but
right.
They mentioned, January 6th again.
Right.
And it's just, they're not talking climate change always constantly. They're never talking about what people actually care about. So even in a broader way, I think these things are pretty much useless. I bet you it doesn't do anything really to the polls. We learned nothing. Did we learn anything new about where they stood on anything? I don't think I learned anything new from that debate.
No, I agree with that general assessment. Yeah, I mean, the other thing, too, just in terms of issues not covered, which is sort of embarrassing if you had any integrity as a journalist, which I'm not saying they do, of course. Now we're all here 12 hours later talking about the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. Oh, yeah, remember that? And we still have an Islamo-fascist threat in this world. And frankly, in the West, oh, yeah, remember them? And this is obviously being driven home by what's going on in the Middle East right now. But as keen observers will note, what's happening in the Middle East, including Bibi, what's happening in the Middle East is really an attack on the West, Iran and this axis of evil that includes China and Russia and, all of their terrorist proxies. I mean, the great Satan is Israel, but it's really America, and they always have an eye towards doing something locally that they can scale globally.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, her answers on that didn't even make any sense. They made sense because she has no real moral framework that she uses other than using power and being elected, But she says to Donald Trump, it's un-American to say that you don't want Ukrainians to win, that you just want to have, that they should have a ceasefire. But 5 minutes before, she said that Israel has to be in a ceasefire with the terrorist group Hamas. It doesn't make sense. One of these is, a terroristic organization under our own Justice Department, right, Hamas, and kills Americans. And yet she says they need to have a ceasefire. Israel can defend itself. I'm not sure how it can do that in a ceasefire. But yet Ukraine can't agree with Russia to a deal. So even the things that she said that, technically make no sense, but I don't think she was trying to make sense. She was just, it's all gibberish and platitudes. And, I think probably most people watching that who are not, completely invested in politics probably thought she won. So, I mean, that's just how it works.
David Harsanyi, senior editor at the Federalist, Federalist.com. David, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, I'm Ken Mariotti, owner of Woodland Windows and Doors in Roselle. Summer is here, which is the ideal time to let the sunshine in and brighten up the house. Make those rooms that may appear